The laughter of 6 men rang out as Preston Bancroft spat on the back of Andre Winston's work jacket at 5:14 p.m. A fierce fight broke out right in front of 6-year-old Harper when Preston pushed her down to force Andre to sign the rental move-out paper. The Bancroft group wanted to use violence to crush the poor, weak people in Savannah. Andre, a 37-year-old single dad trying to fix Oakhaven Park's iron swing for his daughter's smile, was now forced into a life-or-death fight. With dark forces, fake assault lawsuits, and an intense hunt, what will this man, with MMA blood, do to save himself? Before that laughter faded under the old oak trees, Andre's world looked much smaller and much quieter. He lived with Harper in a rented wooden house on Maple Street. The paint was peeling near the front door. A row of tulips grew by the porch steps. Andre planted them himself, one bulb at a time, just so his daughter would have something bright to look at every morning. His only tool for making money sat in the driveway. It was a rusted 2005 Ford F-150, dented on one side from a hailstorm years back. Andre used it to haul his mower, his rake, and his old canvas bag of clippers. Cutting grass for other families earned him $4.217.83 a month after taxes. It was not much, but it was honest and it was steady. Inside a metal trunk in the shed, wrapped in a soft velvet cloth, sat something Andre never talked about. A championship belt, the kind fighters dream about their whole lives. It was the middleweight title from a major MMA league, and Andre had once worn it around his waist in front of screaming crowds. Next to the belt was a photograph of his late wife, Sarah. She smiled at the camera, her hair caught mid-laugh by the wind. Andre lost her 3 years ago to a long illness. After that, he made one promise to himself. No more cages, no more blood, just Harper and a quiet life far from cameras and violence. Every Tuesday and Friday, Andre took Harper to Oakhaven Park. Spanish moss hung low from ancient oak branches, brushing the tops of their heads. The air smelled of cut grass mixed with salt drifting in from the coast. An old iron swing set stood near the sandbox, its chains rusted and squeaking with every push. One hinge had snapped months ago, leaving the seat tilted at an angle. Andre carried a small toolbox with him, hoping to fix it properly one day. Harper loved that broken swing more than any toy she owned. She said it sang, when it moved, a soft metal groan that made her giggle every time. Andre worked slowly, kneeling in the dirt with a wrench in one hand. Grass stains covered the knees of his faded work pants. Sweat gathered along his collar under the thick Georgia heat. He wanted peace more than anything. He wanted Harper to grow up without ever knowing her father used to break bones for a living. But peace in Savannah was about to run out. The next morning, at 8:30 sharp, 2 police officers knocked on Andre's door. They handed him a court summons. Attached to it was a civil lawsuit demanding $150,000 in damages. Andre's chest tightened as he read the papers twice. Preston Bancroft, the son of a powerful local developer, claimed that Andre had violently attacked him and his 5 friends at Oakhaven Park. A forged medical report backed the story. Preston's father had paid a doctor to fake the injuries. Preston was 26 years old and had never worked an honest day in his life. His father's company, Bancroft Property Group, controlled dozens of commercial projects across Savannah. Preston wanted the land under Oakhaven Park cleared for a new luxury apartment tower. Getting rid of a quiet gardener seemed easy enough. Preston never imagined the man he mocked could fight back with anything more than silence. At the very same hour, a notice appeared taped to Andre's front door. Bancroft Property Group ordered him to vacate his rented home within 72 hours. The reason listed was a vague violation of neighborhood conduct. If Andre lost this fight, he would lose his $8 in savings. Worse, he could go to prison. And if that happened, Harper would end up in foster care. Andre read the eviction notice a second time under the porch light. The paper trembled slightly between his fingers. Somewhere down the block, A lawnmower buzzed, ordinary and distant, like nothing in the world had changed. He stepped inside and found Harper sitting at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of two stick figures holding hands. She looked up and smiled, unaware that her whole world had just been threatened by men she had never met. "Daddy, can we fix the swing this weekend?" she asked, holding up a crayon drawing of the park. Andre forced a smile onto his face. "Of course, baby. I promised, didn't I?" He sat down across from her, his mind racing behind a calm expression. Somewhere across town, Preston Bancroft was likely celebrating with his friends, certain that money would settle everything. Andre sat at his kitchen table that night, unable to sleep. Moonlight spilled across the old pine wood. He watched Harper sleep down the hall, her arms wrapped around a worn cloth doll. His hands trembled as he thought about the cage lights, the roar of old crowds, the reporters who once called him a monster with fists. If he admitted who he really was, they would use it against him. They would call him dangerous. They would say no court should ever give a child to a man like that. So Andre chose the quiet road first. He drove downtown to the Bancroft Property Group Tower, a shining building 22 stories tall. Glass panels reflected the morning sun, so brightly that Andre had to shield his eyes. He stepped through the revolving doors, into a lobby that smelled faintly of fresh paint and expensive cologne. His work boots left faint prints on the polished marble floor. He asked to speak with someone about a settlement. He offered to sign the move-out papers if they dropped the lawsuit. Preston did not even look up from his phone. He waved over two security guards. They grabbed Andre's folder of documents and threw it into a puddle on the sidewalk. Preston laughed from the lobby window as Andre knelt to gather the soaked papers. Rainwater soaked through Andre's boots as he walked away, saying nothing. A receptionist behind a glass desk barely glanced up from her computer screen. She told Andre to take a seat and wait. 23 minutes passed before anyone called his name. When Preston finally appeared, he wore a crisp navy suit and polished leather shoes that clicked sharply against the marble floor. A thick gold watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist. "You came all this way for nothing," Preston said, smirking at the folder in Andre's hands. "Did you really think I'd just forgive and forget?" Andre kept his voice low and even. "I only want this to end peacefully, for my daughter's sake." Preston laughed, loud enough that heads turned across the lobby. "Your daughter should have thought about that before her father decided to play tough guy in a park." That same evening, desperate and worn thin, Andre drove to the edge of South Savannah. A small boxing gym sat between a laundromat and a closed diner. The sign outside read Carter's Corner, its red paint faded by years of sun. Inside, the air smelled like old leather and chalk dust. A single ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, clicking with every rotation. Two teenagers sparred quietly in the far corner, their gloves thudding softly against a worn training pad. Neither one looked up as Andre walked past. Marcus "Pop" Carter, 65 years old, stood wiping down a heavy bag. He had trained Andre since Andre was 17. He looked up, saw the mud on Andre's jacket, and set down his rag without a word. "Sit down, son," Marcus said. His voice was low and rough like gravel under a tire. Andre told him everything. The lawsuit, the eviction notice, the security guards. Marcus listened, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed. When Andre finished, Marcus reached under the front counter. He pulled out an old digital voice recorder, its plastic case scratched and yellowed with age. "Your biggest fights were never with your fists," Marcus said. "They were the calm before the other man swung first. This time, you win with a clear head, not a closed one." Marcus had trained fighters in that same gym for over 40 years. Faded posters covered the walls, each one showing a different champion he once coached. Andre's photo hung near the register, his gloved fists raised high above his head. "You remember your first fight here?" Marcus asked, setting 2 cups of black coffee on the counter. 17 years old, scared out of your mind." Andre managed a small, tired laugh. "You told me fear just means the fight matters. Still true, Marcus said. This fight matters more than any belt ever did. Marcus made one phone call that night. It was to David Vance, a retired civil rights lawyer who had spent 30 years fighting corrupt land deals across Georgia. David had crossed paths with the Bancroft family before, and he had never forgotten it. 2 days later, Andre sat across from David in a small office above a hardware store. Papers covered every surface. "They offered you a settlement, didn't they?" David asked, sliding a folder toward Andre. Andre nodded. $5,000. To sign and disappear. David's eyebrows lifted. "That's an insult, Andre. Not an offer." Andre looked at the folder for a long moment. Then he picked up a pen and signed his name to a different document. Not a surrender. A formal notice of intent to fight the lawsuit in court. With that signature, Andre crossed into a world he never wanted to enter again. A world of lawyers, headlines, and men with more money than conscience. The first hearing was set for a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock inside the Savannah County Courthouse. Marble columns rose along the front steps, worn smooth by more than a century of footsteps. Andre stood outside the tall wooden doors, straightening his only clean collared shirt. His hands felt strangely heavy, the same weight he once carried walking toward a cage full of cameras. Inside, David laid out folders with practice calm. "This is only the beginning," he told Andre quietly. "They'll try to drown us in paperwork before we ever reach a jury." Andre nodded, jaw tight, saying nothing. He thought of Harper waiting at Marcus's gym, drawing pictures on the back of old fight flyers. But the real war had already started outside the courtroom. Preston's father, Harrison Bancroft, wanted Andre erased quietly. Within a week, 3 of Andre's regular mowing clients canceled their contracts. Someone had called each of them, warning that Andre was dangerous. His income dropped by nearly 80% almost overnight. Andre counted his remaining cash at the kitchen table one evening, the bills spread out under a dim lamp. He had enough left for groceries, but not much beyond that. He skipped his own dinner twice that week, telling Harper he simply was not hungry. He watched her eat every bite, grateful she never noticed his empty plate. One night, Andre walked outside and found both front tires of his truck slashed. The rubber hung in long, jagged strips under the porch light. A private investigator named Arthur Vance, hired by the Bancroft family, began following Andre from a distance. He dug through old fight records, hoping to build a story about a violent ex-fighter finally snapping. Then came a name Andre did not expect. Brody, one of the 6 young men who had cornered him that day in the park, started losing sleep over what happened. Brody's older sister had once battled leukemia as a child. A quiet, anonymous charity fund had paid for her treatment years ago. Brody never knew who ran that fund until now. He recognized the man in the torn work jacket. It was Andre. Guilt sat heavy in Brody's stomach every time Preston bragged about scaring that poor gardener out of Savannah. Arthur Vance parked a gray sedan across the street from Andre's house most evenings. He photographed Andre loading his mower, jotting notes about old fight records in a worn leather notebook. He hoped to prove Andre had a violent temper hiding beneath his calm surface. Arthur even followed Andre to the grocery store one afternoon, snapping photos through a zoom lens from across the parking lot. He found nothing but a tired father buying juice boxes and bread. One afternoon, Arthur approached a neighbor watering her garden. He asked pointed questions about Andre's past, hinting that something dark was hidden behind that quiet smile. The neighbor, Miss Ruth, simply shook her head. "That man mows half this street for free. When folks fall on hard times," she said. "You're barking up the wrong tree, mister." Meanwhile, Preston pushed harder. He filed an anonymous report with Child Protective Services, claiming Andre suffered brain injuries from fighting and could not safely raise a child. Andre scrubbed the kitchen floor twice that morning, though it was already spotless. He straightened Harper's toys along the shelf 3 separate times, unable to sit still. A CPS caseworker arrived at Andre's home at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She walked through every room, checking cabinets, checking smoke detectors, asking pointed questions about Andre's past. The caseworker's pen scratched steadily across her clipboard. She asked Andre to describe any injuries from his years of competing. She asked if he ever lost his temper around his daughter. Andre's jaw locked tight as he answered each question. His knuckles pressed white against his knee under the table. But his voice stayed warm and steady for Harper's sake. Harper wandered in from the hallway, clutching her cloth doll, and climbed straight into Andre's lap. The caseworker watched closely as Harper pressed her small head against her father's chest, completely at ease. Something in the caseworker's expression softened, just slightly, though her clipboard notes stayed guarded and formal. After she left, Andre sat alone at the table for a long time. The house felt too quiet, the ceiling fan clicking overhead like a slow countdown. The next hearing would decide whether he kept custody of his daughter. He needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Words alone would not be enough against the Bancroft name. For a hook, Andre had no idea that a small camera on Harper's toy stroller had already caught something Preston never wanted the world to see. Preston, growing impatient, arranged one final meeting. He asked Andre to come to an empty underground parking garage behind the Savannah Riverfront Hotel at 9:45 that night. He called it a negotiation. It was a trap. Preston brought 5 hired men armed with baseball bats. Their plan was simple: break Andre's hands so he could never work, never fight, never resist again. Andre arrived carrying Harper, fast asleep against his left shoulder. He had no choice. Her babysitter had canceled at the last minute. A single flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete pillars. The air smelled of motor oil and cold cement. Somewhere far above, tires rolled across the street, muffled and distant. Preston's men fanned out slowly, bats resting against their shoulders. One of them cracked his knuckles, grinning at what he thought would be an easy job. "Last chance, Andre," Preston called out, his voice bouncing off the low ceiling. "Sign the papers, or these boys get to work." Andre said nothing. He adjusted Harper's weight gently against his shoulder, careful not to wake her. When the men rushed forward, swinging their bats, through the dim garage light, Andre moved like water. His feet slid across the concrete with the same footwork that once won him a world title. He used only his right arm to block and redirect. He let the men's own momentum throw them off balance. One by one, 3 attackers hit the ground hard, groaning against cold concrete. A 4th man swung wide and missed entirely, his bat clanging loud against a support beam. Andre pivoted sharply, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and sending him sprawling backward. The 5th man froze completely, bat lowering slowly to his side. He glanced at his fallen friends, then at the sleeping child still resting peacefully on Andre's shoulder. Harper never woke up. She stirred once, then settled back into sleep, thinking her father was simply carrying her home. Preston stood frozen, his mouth open, his throat suddenly dry. He had never seen anything like it. The gentle gardener he mocked had just moved like a machine built for war. The garage fell silent except for low groans from the fallen men. Harper stirred once more against Andre's shoulder, then settled back into sleep. Preston backed away slowly, his polished shoes scraping against the concrete. He turned and ran toward the exit ramp without looking back. Right after the fight, Brody stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. His hand shook as he passed Andre a small memory card. "It's a recording," Brody whispered. 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Preston admitting everything. The fake medical report. The plan to break your hands tonight. Andre also remembered something else. Weeks earlier, he had hidden a tiny dash camera inside Harper's toy stroller at the park. That camera had captured every second of that first attack. Preston kicking over the toolbox. Preston spitting on Andre's jacket. Preston shoving Harper to the ground. "Why now?" Andre asked quietly. studying Brody's trembling hands. Brody stared at the ground, unable to meet Andre's eyes. My sister told me once about a man who paid her hospital bills without asking for thanks. I didn't know it was you until last week. He wiped his face with his sleeve, voice cracking. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry. Andre placed a steady hand on Brody's shoulder. It's not too late to do the right thing, he said. That's all that matters now. 2 pieces of truth now sat in Andre's pocket, small enough to hold in one hand, heavy enough to end a fortune. David Vance examined both pieces of evidence the next morning, his glasses pushed low on his nose. He played the audio twice, then set it down carefully on his desk. This is more than enough, David said, his voice low and steady. This isn't just a lawsuit anymore, Andre. This is the end of the Bancroft empire. Harrison Bancroft learned about the evidence within days. He was not a man who lost quietly. He invited Andre and David Vance to a closed-door dinner at a private restaurant downtown. The room smelled of aged wine and roasted garlic. A single waiter stood silently by the far wall, waiting for a signal to leave. Harrison arrived wearing a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. 3 gold rings caught the candlelight as he folded his hands on the table. I built this city's skyline, Mr. Winston, Harrison said, his tone smooth as polished stone. I can also make sure you never work in it again. Candlelight flickered over white tablecloths as Harrison slid a check across the table. The number read $500, 000. Beside it sat a lifetime confidentiality agreement. Money can buy silence in this city, Harrison said, his voice cold and flat. Take it. Leave Georgia with your daughter, or you'll vanish into a federal prison and you'll never see her again. David leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Bancroft, threats don't hold up well in front of jury. Harrison ignored him, his eyes fixed only on Andre. $500,000, Mr. Winston. More than you'll earn cutting grass in 20 years. Andre looked at the check. Then he looked at Harrison Bancroft's pale, waiting eyes. He slid the check back across the table. There are things your money can never buy, Andre said quietly. My daughter's father and his honor. Harrison's face tightened, his jaw shifting slightly beneath the candlelight. He said nothing more, simply waving a hand for the waiter to clear the table. Outside, the night air felt cool against Andre's skin. He breathed deeply, feeling lighter than he had in weeks, despite the danger still waiting ahead. The trial began on a bright Thursday morning at the Savannah Superior Court. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust drifting slowly above the wooden benches. Reporters, paid for and organized by the Bancroft family, packed the front rows. Andre sat beside David Vance at the defense table, his hands folded calmly in front of him. Harper stayed with Marcus that day, drawing pictures of the courthouse from memory. A hush fell over the room as the judge entered, her black robe rustling softly. She reminded both sides that this case would be decided on evidence alone, not rumor. Preston's lawyers presented the forged medical records first. They called witnesses who repeated a rehearsed story about a violent gardener with a hidden past. Preston sat at the plaintiff's table, chin lifted, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Then one witness, paid quietly by the Bancroft family, described Andre as reckless and aggressive. Andre kept his eyes forward, hands folded, his breathing slow and steady. David Vance rose to his feet. Your Honor, he said, we request permission to submit new evidence. The judge nodded. The courtroom lights dimmed. A large screen flickered to life. The video began to play. Preston kicking the toolbox. Preston spitting on Andre's back. Preston shoving a 6-year-old girl to the pavement while she cried out for her father. Gasps rippled through the gallery like a sudden wind through dry leaves. Then came the audio. Preston's own voice, crisp and unmistakable, laying out the plan to fake an assault and hire men to break Andre's hands. Color drained from Preston's face like water through a cracked pipe. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles bone white. The jury shifted in their seats, faces hardening with quiet fury. Preston's lawyer buried his head in his hands. Preston tried to speak, but his voice cracked halfway through the first word. He said nothing else for the rest of the hearing. Harrison Bancroft sat 3 rows back, his face frozen, his rings tapping nervously against the wooden bench. For the first time in his life, his money could not fix what his son had done. The judge called for order, as murmurs spread through the gallery like ripples across still water. She turned to the jury and asked for their attention on the new evidence submitted. Outside the courthouse steps, reporters who once mocked Andre now scrambled for a single quote. Andre said only one sentence before walking past them. "I only ever wanted to raise my daughter in peace." 3 days later, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Every charge against Andre was dropped completely. The countersuit against the Bancroft family moved forward without delay. 2 weeks after the trial ended, sunlight spread gently across Oakhaven Park on a calm afternoon. Neighbors gathered near the playground, setting out folding chairs and paper plates. The old broken iron swing was gone. In its place stood a brand new one, built from polished stainless steel. A small engraved plate read, "For Harper Winston, from neighbors who love her." Andre leaned against the trunk of the old oak tree, still wearing his familiar work clothes. But something in his face had changed. His shoulders sat looser now. His eyes held a quiet, steady peace. Harper laughed loudly as she swung higher and higher, her small sneakers pointed toward the summer sky. Marcus stood near the grill, flipping burgers for a crowd of neighbors who had shown up to celebrate. Miss Ruth handed out lemonade in paper cups, telling anyone who would listen how she always knew Andre was a good man. Brody stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, unsure if he belonged there. Andre walked over, handed him a plate of food, and nodded toward an open seat at the table. "Come sit with us," Andre said simply. "Family isn't only about blood." Brody's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. He sat down beside Marcus, listening to old stories about Andre's early fighting days. Bancroft Property Group now faced a wide investigation from the state attorney's office, accused of bribery, fraud, and staged evidence. Preston received a 3-year prison sentence. Oakhaven Park, along with the surrounding neighborhood, was protected permanently from demolition. Andre also won a countersuit against the Bancroft family for slander and public humiliation. The court awarded him $450,000 in damages. He never once raised his fists in anger through the entire fight. He only used patience, evidence, and the quiet strength of a father who refused to bow. David Vance stopped by the celebration briefly, shaking Andre's hand with a wide, tired smile. "You did this, Andre," he said. "Not the belt, not the fists. You." As the sun dipped lower behind the moss-covered branches, Andre walked over and lifted Harper into his arms. She rested her head against his shoulder, humming softly to herself. He looked out toward the horizon, past the old swing set, past the tulips someone had already started replanting near the courthouse fence. Marcus called out from the grill, waving Andre over for one last plate before the sun went down. Neighbors laughed and traded stories under strings of warm porch lights. Andre carried Harper slowly across the grass, her small hand curled around his collar. He thought of Sarah and how proud she would have been of the man he chose to become. No one in Savannah would ever again mistake his silence for weakness, and no one would ever again try to take away the home he built for his little girl.